In the depths of the world's most untamed wilderness, from the remote forests of Alaska to the hidden corners of the Rockies, 6 chilling tales unfold. Each story reveals the harrowing encounters between unsuspecting adventurers and the apex predators of the wild. As confidence turns to panic and survival instincts are tested, the line between life and death blurs in these unforgiving terrains. Will anyone escape the clutches of nature's fury? Join us as we recount their harrowing ordeal. Adam, Rick, and Charlie had been friends for over 20 years, their bond rooted in youthful adventures and the thrill of the unknown. However, as life gradually shifted them from adventurous wanderers into sedentary office-bound men, they became overweight, transforming into shadows of the daring young men they had once been. Yet, the allure of the wild was a call they could not ignore. With an air of nostalgia and excitement, they decided to take on the rugged beauty of Wyoming's wilderness, drawn by the promise of adventure and the grandeur of nature, with only the faintest understanding of the risks they might face. Their plan was simple: a brief hike along one of the park's quieter trails and a few days in the wild to reconnect with nature. They didn't prepare for the hike as thoroughly as they should have. With no real training or understanding of the dangers lurking in the wilderness's vast expanse, they armed themselves with only confidence in their ability to handle any situation. Free online videos and articles for guidance, and bare spray cans they barely knew how to use. The trail was quiet when they set off, bathed in sunlight that filtered through the dense trees. The 3 of them walked leisurely, stopping frequently to take in the scenery. The forest was full of life, with birds flitting between the branches and the occasional rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Their laughter echoed through the trees, and for a while it felt as if the world belonged to them. They were happy, carefree, and unaware of the danger that lurked just beyond the tree line. As hours passed, the trail grew narrower, winding deeper into the heart of the forest where the sunlight barely reached the forest floor. The birds had fallen silent, their cheerful melodies replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed to wrap itself around them. The forest felt different now, tense, as if holding its breath. Then came the sound. A slight rustle from behind a thicket drew their attention, and then they saw it. At first, it was just a large, hulking shape emerging from the trees with a slow, deliberate pace. A massive grizzly bear, its eyes locked on them, emerged from the underbrush. The sight of the bear sent a cold wave of terror crashing over them. It stood motionless, watching them, its nostrils flaring as it caught their scent. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The 3 men, once so confident in their ability to handle anything, now found themselves paralyzed. Charlie, the most level-headed of the 3, fumbled for the bear spray in his backpack, his hands shaking as he struggled to unzip the bag. Adam and Rick stood behind him, their faces pale with fear, but neither of them was much better prepared for the situation. The spray was there, but panic had already set in. None of them had practiced with the canisters, and now, under the stress of the moment, they were unable to act decisively. The bear, sensing their hesitation, took another step forward. Its claws scraped against the forest floor, and its growls reverberated through the trees. Amid their confusion, Charlie managed to pull out the bear spray, but in his panic, he forgot to remove the safety pin. The bear's eyes narrowed as it took another step, its muscles rippling under its thick coat. Rick was the first to react, grabbing for his own bear spray, but his clumsy hands struggled to get the cap off. Adam, seeing the bear's approach, tried to move around the others, but his size and the weight of his backpack made him slow and awkward. His attempts to get to a safe position were futile, and he soon found himself trapped in the narrow path with the bear closing in. Suddenly, the grizzly lunged. It was too fast. The bear swiped at Charlie, knocking him to the ground with a ferocious blow. The impact was brutal, and his body was flung into the underbrush. Rick screamed in terror, turning to run, but the bear's large paw connected with his back, sending him sprawling to the dirt. His attempt to reach for the bear spray was useless. The bear was already on top of him. Adam, now paralyzed with fear, turned to flee but couldn't escape. The weight of his body, the awkwardness of his movements, and the sheer panic slowed him to a crawl. He stumbled over a rock, falling face first into the dirt. The bear, relentless in its attack, moved swiftly toward him, claws tearing through the air. The struggle was chaotic and savage. Charlie tried to rise, but was only met with another crushing blow. His screams echoed through the forest, desperate, but the bear was undeterred. Its powerful jaws sank into his side, rending flesh with terrifying ease. Rick, still alive but unable to escape, was dragged beneath the bear, his body pummeled and torn. Adam, helpless and slow, had barely a chance to react before the grizzly was upon him, sinking its claws into his back and dragging him to the ground. The men's desperate attempts to use the bear spray were futile. The canisters went off with little effect, the spray dissipating into the air before it could do any damage. The bear's attack was unrelenting. Each swipe, each bite tore into the men's bodies with brutal force, and no matter how they struggled, no matter how they screamed, there was no escape. The bear's hunger was insatiable, and it showed no mercy. As the attack continued, the men's screams gradually faded into silence, replaced by the grim sound of the bear feeding. It tore through their flesh with ease, its massive jaws working tirelessly as it consumed its prey. By the time the bear had finished, the once lively group of friends had been reduced to little more than broken bodies, scattered across the forest floor. When the bear was finished, it lingered for a moment, sniffing the air to ensure there were no further threats. Satisfied, it turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving behind the remnants of its victims. The quiet of the forest returned, now interrupted only by the distant sound of birds cautiously beginning to sing again. The men whose spirits had once soared with the excitement of adventure were now gone, their lives brutally extinguished by the raw, unforgiving force of nature. Ben Howard had spent over 15 years patrolling the untamed beauty of Alaska's wilds, a realm where raw nature reigned supreme and humanity played by its rules. A seasoned park ranger, Ben was no stranger to the dangers of the wild. His career had been built on an unyielding respect for the forces of nature, particularly the grizzly bears that roamed the park. He had studied their movements, habits, and subtle cues that could determine whether a bear was curious or dangerous. This knowledge had been his armor, keeping him alive through countless close encounters. The wilderness of Alaska, with its jagged peaks and sweeping tundra, demanded vigilance. It was a place of unparalleled beauty, but it showed no mercy for carelessness. On a cool autumn morning, as the first rays of sunlight brushed the snow-capped peaks, Ben prepared for what seemed like a routine patrol. His pack was light, containing just the essentials: first aid, water, a radio for emergencies, and of course bear spray, which he always kept handy. The morning unfolded in its usual rhythm. Ben's boots crunched against the gravel path as he navigated through the dense forest, his sharp eyes scanning for signs of wildlife activity or any disturbances along the trail. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. For hours he moved with purpose, yet always with an appreciation for the wilderness around him. He knew Denali's solitude could be deceiving. Every shadow held potential danger. As the afternoon wore on, the forest began to change. The lively chatter of birds gave way to an unsettling quiet, the kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of Ben's neck stand on end. His senses sharpened. He slowed his pace, his hand instinctively brushing against the bear spray at his hip. He'd walked these trails hundreds of times, but experience had taught him to trust his instincts. Something wasn't right. And then he saw it. Emerging from the trees was a grizzly bear, its enormous frame cloaked in a matted, dark coat that rippled with muscle. It moved with a deliberate gait, its head low, its dark eyes fixed on Ben. This wasn't curiosity. The bear's posture was tense, its shoulders hunched as it sniffed the air. Ben recognized the signs immediately. This bear was hungry, and it wasn't backing down. Keeping his movements slow and deliberate, Ben took a step backward, his heart pounding. He raised his arm slightly, making himself appear larger while avoiding direct eye contact. Running was not an option. It would only provoke a chase. He focused on calming himself, reminding himself that he was not a threat to the creature before him. But the bear was unmoved. It let out a low, guttural growl, its massive paws crunching against the forest floor as it took a step closer. Ben's pulse quickened as he felt the weight of the bear's gaze, a primal instinct screaming at him to flee. The air grew thick with tension, and he could sense the danger escalating. Then, without warning, it charged. The grizzly moved with terrifying speed, a blur of fur and muscle. Ben's instincts kicked in, and he raised the bear spray, unleashing a bright orange cloud into the air. The mist hung between them, acrid and strong, but the bear powered through, its aggression undeterred. Ben barely had time to throw himself sideways, the bear's massive claws slicing through the space he had occupied moments before. Scrambling to his feet, Ben tried to retreat, but the uneven terrain worked against him. His boot caught on a hidden root and he stumbled, falling hard onto the rocky ground. Pain shot through his ankle as it twisted beneath him. He struggled to rise, but the bear was already upon him. The first blow came with the force of a freight train. The bear's paw slammed into Ben's back, tearing through his uniform and raking deep into his flesh. He cried out in agony, the sound swallowed by the forest. The bear's snarls filled the air as it struck again, pinning Ben to the ground. His bear spray canister lay useless a few feet away, the nozzle broken in the fall. Ben fought with everything he had, his hands scrambling for a rock, a stick, anything he could use as a weapon. But the bear was relentless, its jaws closing around his shoulder with a crushing force that sent searing pain through his body. He screamed again, kicking and punching in a desperate attempt to fend off the attack. Each movement felt futile, the bear's strength far beyond anything he could resist. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as the attack continued. The grizzly's claws and teeth tore through Ben's body with brutal efficiency, leaving him bloodied and broken. His vision blurred, the world around him fading into a haze of pain and fear. He thought of his family, his colleagues, and the countless days he had spent protecting this park. A place he loved more than anything. Was this how it would end? Eventually the bear stopped, panting heavily, its breath hot and foul as it loomed over Ben's motionless body. For a moment it seemed to assess him, its dark eyes gleaming with an animalistic intelligence. Then with a final huff, it began to drag him deeper into the forest. Ben, barely clinging to consciousness, felt the rough ground scrape against his torn body before everything went black. Hours later, when Ben failed to check in, a search party was dispatched. Using GPS tracking and radio signals, they followed the trail of destruction into the dense woods. What they found was a harrowing sight. Blood-stained earth, shredded gear, and fragments of Ben's uniform told a grim story. It wasn't until the next morning that his body was discovered, partially buried in a shallow cache, a behavior typical of bears protecting their kills. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the park ranger community. Ben had been one of their best, experienced, cautious, and deeply knowledgeable. His death raised urgent questions about the changing dynamics of wildlife behavior in the park. Was it climate change, dwindling food sources, or simply the unpredictable nature of the wild that had driven the bear to attack so savagely? Ben's legacy became a powerful reminder of the wilderness's raw, unforgiving nature. His colleagues, though devastated, vowed to honor his memory by continuing the work he had dedicated his life to. They tightened safety protocols, improved training for bear encounters, and increased public awareness of the risks in Denali's vast backcountry. But for those who knew him, the loss was deeply personal. Ben had been more than a ranger. He had been a guardian of the wild, a bridge between humanity and nature. His death was a somber testament to the fragile balance between respect and survival in a land where humans were merely visitors. The Smoky Mountains were alive with natural sounds, but the atmosphere around the campsite was far from tranquil. 5 friends, Jack, Sarah, Ben, Olivia, and Ethan, had ventured deep into the park for a weekend getaway. They had planned the trip for months, eager to escape their routines and explore the park's beauty. However, they lacked the experience to truly understand the wilderness they were venturing into. The campsite was nestled between 2 tall pine trees, their trunks rising like sentinels into the evening sky. As the sun set, casting a golden glow across the forest floor, the air was fresh, carrying the earthy scent of wet soil and leaves. The group, however, was loud and carefree. Laughter and jokes echoed through the trees, drowning out the subtle quiet of the forest, a warning sign they failed to notice. Their carefree behavior attracted attention, but the inexperienced group remained blissfully unaware. Throughout the day, they had carelessly disposed of food scraps, tossing potato chip bags and apple cores into the woods. They didn't realize such actions invited wildlife, particularly black bears, which were common in the area. The scent of their food lingered, drawing a bear from the nearby woods. At first, the bear watched from a distance. It stood on its hind legs behind a thicket, blending into the shadows. Its dark eyes scanned the group, nostrils flaring as it caught the scent. Oblivious, the campers continued tossing scraps, laughing loudly. They even joked about being in a bear-proof campsite, confident they were safe. But the bear, patient and calculating, remained hidden, observing them as it decided when to strike. That evening, as the sun sank lower, the group gathered around the campfire to cook their dinner. The crackling of the flames and the warmth of the fire created an illusion of safety in the otherwise dark and quiet woods. They had no idea that they were being watched, their every movement noticed by the bear lurking just beyond the tree line. Around the fire, the campers grew more relaxed, telling stories and roasting marshmallows, their voices rising in volume as the night wore on. It was Jack, the most adventurous of the group, who decided to wander off to collect more firewood. He had been away for only a few minutes when the bear made its move. As Jack stooped down to pick up a fallen branch, the air around him seemed to shift. Before he could react, the bear lunged. It was fast, too fast. The bear's massive paws slammed into Jack's back, sending him sprawling face first into the forest floor. The force of the attack was terrifying. Jack's scream barely escaped his mouth before the bear's jaws closed around his shoulder, tearing into the flesh with terrifying precision. The campers, hearing the noise, whipped around, only to see the bear's dark silhouette looming over their friend. A split second of disbelief washed over them, and then chaos erupted. Sarah and Ben were the first to react. They jumped to their feet and tried to shout at the bear, throwing sticks and rocks in an attempt to drive it off. But the bear wasn't deterred. Its teeth were locked into Jack's side, and it didn't seem to notice their attempts at distraction. The bear's growls filled the air as it shook Jack's body like a rag doll. The force of the attack was brutal, and Jack's cries quickly turned into desperate gasps. Olivia screamed, running toward the nearby tent in a panicked frenzy to grab a bear spray canister. Her hands shook as she fumbled to remove the safety cap, but it was too late. The bear, having tasted blood, was already turning its attention toward the rest of the group. With terrifying speed, it released its grip on Jack and swiped at Ben, knocking him back. Ben fell hard against a boulder, winded and disoriented, his face covered in dirt and scratches. Ethan, the most athletic in the group, lunged forward with a large branch, hoping to strike the bear, but his swing missed by inches, and the bear countered with a swipe of its paw, raking deep claw marks across his chest. The campers, now injured and disoriented, were too slow to react. Olivia finally managed to deploy the bear spray, but the bear was so close that the spray barely had any effect. The cloud of repellent dissipated in the air, but the bear continued its attack, ignoring the discomfort the spray caused. Its rage had been unleashed, and it was determined to finish what it had started. The attack was a blur of claws, teeth, and frantic movement. Sarah, unable to reach the others, scrambled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. She tripped over a rock, falling into the campfire pit, narrowly avoiding the flames. Her clothes smoldered, but she ignored the pain, struggling to get back on her feet. Meanwhile, Jack, bloodied and torn, had stopped moving entirely, his body limp beneath the bear's crushing weight. The others were bruised, bleeding, and exhausted, each one too disoriented to mount any meaningful defense. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the bear stepped back, its hunger momentarily satisfied. The campers lay scattered, severely injured but alive as the bear ambled back into the trees, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. The night was eerily quiet once more, the sounds of the forest seemingly returning to normal, but for the campers, the terror lingered. They lay on the forest floor, unable to move or process what had just happened. The group was in no condition to fend for themselves. Luckily, park rangers had been conducting their usual night patrols, and the bear attack did not go unnoticed. The rangers discovered the campsite not long after the attack, their flashlights catching the bloody scene. They immediately called for help, their radios crackling as they coordinated emergency medical assistance. A helicopter was dispatched to airlift the campers to the nearest hospital, where they were treated for severe injuries, including bites, lacerations, and contusions. The attack had a profound impact on the Smoky Mountains. Officials reviewed and revised bear safety protocols, placing stricter regulations on food storage and wildlife interactions in the backcountry. The tragic events of that night served as a grim reminder of the dangers of the wild and the importance of respecting wildlife. The campers, though scarred by the attack, were lucky to have survived. Their ordeal was a stark warning about the unpredictability of nature and the necessity of responsible behavior in the wilderness. Miles into the remote wilderness of Montana's Rocky Mountains, Derek Foster hiked a trail few had ventured. A seasoned hiker, Derek was no stranger to the harsh beauty of the mountain wilderness. Over the years, he'd trekked through rugged terrain, spent countless nights under the stars, and faced nature's unpredictable challenges. This particular trail had always intrigued him, a quieter route far from tourist paths, offering the solitude he craved. Yet even for experienced hikers like Derek, the wild remained unpredictable, and its inhabitants could not be underestimated. Though Derek had crossed paths with animals in the past, he had always been cautious and prepared. He carried bear spray, practiced avoidance tactics, and stayed vigilant. Glacier's vast expanse, home to grizzlies, was not to be taken lightly. Derek had studied their behavior, memorized safety protocols, and knew the importance of maintaining distance. Still, nothing could truly prepare him for the unexpected. On the day of the encounter, the sky was clear and the air crisp, a perfect hiking day. The sun, already high in the sky, beat down on the rugged terrain, casting shadows over the steep cliffs and dense thickets. The scent of pine mingled with fresh earth, and the distant call of birds broke the silence. Derek's steps were steady, his backpack light with essentials, water, a first aid kit, and bear spray secured at his side. Hours passed without seeing another soul. The solitude of the trail was calming, and Derek cherished the serenity of being alone in the wild. But he remained alert, scanning for signs of wildlife and mindful of warnings about increased bear activity. As he rounded a bend in the trail, Derek was met with an unexpected sight. A grizzly bear stood not 20 feet away, its massive frame moving slowly through the underbrush. The bear's coat was thick, and its dark eyes gleamed with the sharp, intelligent focus of an apex predator. It was sniffing the air, its head tilted as if it had sensed something out of the ordinary. Derek's heart raced as he froze, instinctively reaching for the bear spray strapped to his side. The bear's gaze turned toward him, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. Derek's hand trembled slightly, but he maintained his composure. The bear wasn't making any aggressive movements yet, but its posture was tense. It was a large male, likely in search of food, its broad shoulders heavy with muscle. The wind swirling in unpredictable gusts, and Derek knew that his next move would be crucial. His mind raced through the training and advice he had read in books and heard from rangers. Avoid eye contact. Make yourself seem larger, back away slowly. But Derek couldn't take his eyes off the bear. He had heard the stories of the hungry territorial grizzlies in Glacier, and he knew that proximity to such a beast was a dangerous game. With a deep breath, Derek began to slowly retreat, hoping that the bear would lose interest. He kept his body angled away from the bear while still keeping his eyes trained on it. The forest around him was thick, and he could feel the ground beneath his boots shift as he made his way back, trying to put distance between them. But the bear, sensing an intruder, wasn't so easily deterred. Without warning, the bear charged. The speed with which it closed the gap between them was shocking. It moved with the power of a storm, its massive paws digging into the earth with each stride. Derek's mind screamed to use the bear spray, but the wind was fierce, whipping the spray back toward him, rendering the canister useless. The bear's roar filled the air as it barreled toward him, and Derek turned on his heels, adrenaline surging through his veins. He bolted, but his feet faltered on the uneven ground, a mix of panic and the weight of his backpack throwing off his balance. The bear was too fast. Its claws slashed through the air, tearing at his jacket and grazing his side. The pain was immediate and sharp, but there was no time to focus on it. Derek pushed forward, trying to outrun the beast, but the terrain was uneven, and the bear's strength was unstoppable. It slammed into his back, sending him sprawling to the ground. His head collided with a rock, briefly stunning him, and before he could react, the bear was on top of him, its weight crushing him to the forest floor. Derek's survival instincts kicked in, but they were no match for the bear's raw power. The grizzly's claws raked across his chest and stomach, opening deep gashes that bled freely. His hands reached for anything, fingers grasping at the dirt, but the bear was relentless, dragging him further into the underbrush away from the trail. Derek fought with everything he had, his legs kicking out, his arms swinging, but the bear's grip was iron-like, and each blow from its jaws sent waves of agony through his body. His heart pounded in his ears as he felt his strength fading. It was over in a matter of minutes. The bear had its way, moving away as suddenly as it had attacked, its hunger sated for the moment. Derek, broken and battered, lay motionless in the woods, surrounded by the eerie silence of the forest. It wasn't until days later that a search party found him. Rangers had noticed his absence and sent teams to track him down. The signs of the attack were evident: claw marks, deep punctures from the bear's teeth, and it was clear from the scene that Derek had fought hard to survive. But ultimately, he had been overpowered. The discovery of Derek's body sent shockwaves through the community. He had been an experienced hiker, a seasoned traveler of the wild, but even he wasn't immune to the dangers of the park's apex predators. The incident led to a thorough review of bear management protocols in the area. Rangers increased their patrols, public awareness campaigns about bear safety were intensified, and more precautions were taken to educate visitors about the risks of the wilderness. The forested wilderness of Montana was alive with the crackle of autumn leaves underfoot and the crisp scent of pine. Lorcan Hayes and Darian Price, seasoned hunters but not immune to the intoxicating lure of a perfect shot, ventured deep into this untamed landscape. Their sights were set on elk, an animal known not only for its elusive nature, but also for the skill and patience required to track it. Both men had combed these woods in the past, always mindful of the land's dangers, but confident in their preparedness. What they did not account for was that misplaced confidence often breeds carelessness. The sun had barely risen when they set out, their rifles slung across their backs and gear strapped tightly. A faint mist clung to the ground, blurring the distinction between the living forest and the hunter's own imaginations. Lorcan, broad-shouldered and deliberate in his movements, led the way. Darian followed close behind, his wiry frame moving with quiet precision, though his mind wandered toward thoughts of their quarry. The elk sign was fresh. Trampled grass, claw marks on nearby trees, scat not more than a day old. Their venture took them farther into the forest than either had planned. As the hours passed, the hunters grew bolder, chasing the faint whispers of their prey deeper into the shadows of the wilderness. The landscape grew denser, the towering pines and jagged outcroppings, creating a labyrinth that was both exhilarating and unnerving. In their fervor, neither man noticed the subtle change in the forest's atmosphere. The birds had ceased their calls, replaced by an eerie, pervasive stillness. The air grew heavier, the kind that clings to the skin and pricks the nerves. Lorcan paused, his brow furrowed, scanning the area. He whispered something about doubling back, but the faintest trace of clawed ground ahead caught his attention. Without thinking, they pressed on. They stumbled upon it without warning, a yawning crevice in the hillside partially hidden by brush and fallen logs. The den reeked of musk and earth, its entrance ominously dark and wide enough to fit a grown man standing tall. Around the opening lay scattered remnants, tufts of fur, cracked bones, and a scattering of old dried blood. A warning written in nature's script, though neither hunter heeded it. Darian's curiosity betrayed him. Against better judgment, he crouched near the entrance to examine the tracks, trying to determine how fresh they were. Lorcan hissed for him to stop, but the admonition came too late. From the darkness of the den emerged a sound that froze them both, a low, guttural growl that built into a roar, reverberating through their bones. The grizzly appeared in a blur of muscle and rage, its massive frame dwarfing the hunters. Eyes that glinted with primal fury locked onto them. It was not merely defending its territory, it was enforcing its dominance, a raw force of nature that neither Lorcan nor Darian was prepared to face. Lorcan reacted first, his survival instincts honed through years of hunting. He shouted for Darian to retreat and turn to run, but his feet seemed leaden under the bear's baleful glare. Darian, panicking, scrambled for the nearest tree and clawed his way up the bark. The bear, however, was faster, closing the distance with terrifying speed. With a swipe of its massive paw, it slammed against the tree, shaking Darian loose. He fell hard, the air knocked from his lungs as he hit the ground. Lorcan turned, his rifle now unslung and trembling in his grip. He aimed at the charging bear, his breath sharp and uneven. The first shot rang out, a deafening crack that echoed through the trees. The bullet struck, but it seemed to do little more than enrage the creature further. Lorcan fired again, the second shot grazing its thick hide. The bear was upon him before he could reload, rearing up to its full height and crashing down on him with a weight that seemed to quake the earth itself. Darian, dazed and battered, staggered to his feet and reached for his rifle. His fingers fumbled as adrenaline and fear fought for control. He managed a single shot, but his aim was wild, the bullet striking a tree several feet from its target. The bear roared again, its attention briefly shifting to him, and Lorcan seized the moment to roll away, clutching at his side where the bear's claws had raked him. What followed was chaos incarnate. The bear, a relentless juggernaut, lunged at Darian with renewed fury. He tried to dodge, but the grizzly's claws caught his leg, dragging him to the ground. Lorcan, bleeding and desperate, grabbed a fallen branch and swung it with all his might at the bear's flank. The blow was enough to momentarily distract the animal, but not enough to stop it. The grizzly turned back to Lorcan, its bloodied muzzle snarling with unrelenting ferocity. Lorcan swung again, a futile attempt at defiance, but the bear batted the branch away effortlessly. It pinned him, its immense weight crushing his chest, and delivered the fatal blow. Darian crawled backward, his injured leg trailing blood across the forest floor. His rifle was out of reach and his strength was failing. The bear loomed over him, its breathing heavy but triumphant. There was no mercy in its eyes, only the primal law of the wilderness, survive and dominate. When the bear finally retreated, its rage sated, and the forest grew quiet once more. The hunters lay still, their bodies battered and lifeless, their rifles useless beside them. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the scene of devastation. Days later, a search team found them. The seasoned trackers read the signs with grim precision. The erratic footprints, the blood-streaked earth, the drag marks leading away. The hunters' remains were scattered, the story of their final moments etched into the forest floor. The wilderness, indifferent and eternal, carried on. The elk moved through the trees as they always had, their paths crossing the faint traces of a struggle long past. The grizzly, an apex predator, returned to its domain, a silent guardian of the land it called home. Lorcan and Darian had underestimated the raw power of nature, a mistake that cost them everything. Their story became a cautionary tale among the local hunting community, a reminder that the wilderness is not a realm to be tamed, but a force to be respected. Montana's forests stood as they always had, vast, beautiful, and unforgiving, while the echoes of the two hunters' final moments faded into the stillness of the woods. The northern Wyoming wilderness stretched vast and untamed under a pale dawn sky. Patches of snow lingered in the shadows of dense pines, and the crisp air stung exposed skin. This was grizzly country, where every step carried the weight of untold histories. For the 5 trail runners preparing for an ultramarathon, it was the perfect proving ground, a place to test their grit against the wilderness. Leading the group was Tegan Holt, a lean man whose drive for competition bordered on obsession. He had planned the route, promising a challenge that would push them to their limits. Close behind him was Cora Mendel, whose quiet demeanor belied a fierce competitive streak. Ezra Flint, a seasoned runner with a wiry frame, joked that he was there to keep the youngsters honest. Rounding out the group were Avery Chan and Finn O'Keefe, determined newcomers eager to prove themselves. Their trail wound through foothills, shrouded in towering evergreens. Frost crunched under their shoes as they ran, their breaths clouding in the cold air. Conversation was sparse. The effort of maintaining their pace took precedence. Besides, the beauty of the wilderness demanded silent admiration. As they climbed higher, the trail became less distinct, with patches of snow clinging stubbornly to the ground. Tegan veered off the main path onto a faint route, confident in his vague memory of scouting it months prior. The others followed, trusting his lead. What they didn't know was that Tegan had only scouted this section once, and his memory of its features was hazy at best. The morning wore on, the runners lost in the hypnotic cadence of their footfalls and breath. They were so focused that they missed the signs, clawed trees, tracks in the mud, the eerie silence of the forest. Even the pungent musk of a grizzly bear's territory escaped their attention. Rounding a blind corner, the group froze. 30 yards ahead, a massive grizzly bear loomed over the remains of an elk carcass. The bear's fur glistened in shades of brown and silver, and its dark eyes fixed on the runners with unblinking intensity. For a moment, time froze. Then the bear rose on its hind legs, its guttural roar splitting the air like thunder. The spell broke, and panic took hold. Tegan reacted first, his survival instincts overriding reason. He bolted downhill without a word, his flight triggering the bear's predatory instincts. It charged with terrifying speed, each stride devouring the distance. The ground seemed to quake beneath its massive frame. The rest of the group scattered. Cora scrambled uphill, clawing at the steep incline, while Ezra and Avery sought cover behind nearby trees. Finn hesitated for a moment before sprinting after Tegan, his fear paralyzing any rational thought. The bear overtook Tegan in seconds. One swipe of its powerful paw sent him sprawling to the ground. His face twisted in shock as pain ripped through him. He tried to crawl away, but the bear's sheer strength pinned him. Ezra, witnessing the attack, grabbed a thick branch and charged downhill, shouting to distract the animal. The bear momentarily turned its attention, allowing Tegan to drag himself to safety, but Ezra's intervention came at a price. The bear lunged, its jaws clamping down on his leg with a sickening crunch as he screamed in agony. Cora, perched on a boulder above the scene, searched desperately for something to help. She found a large rock and hurled it at the bear with all her strength. The projectile struck the animal's flank, causing it to release Ezra and turn toward this new threat. The bear roared again, louder and more furious than before. Avery and Finn, seeing the bear climbing toward Cora, rushed to her aid. Avery shouted for Finn to flank the animal while he approached head-on, waving his arms to appear larger. But their bravery came at a cost. The bear charged Avery first, its speed defying its size. It struck him with a ferocious blow, sending him tumbling down the slope, limp and lifeless. Finn, now directly in the bear's path, hesitated. His indecision cost him as the bear's massive body collided with his, knocking him flat. The bear pinned him, its claws tearing into his torso, silencing his cries within moments. Cora, terrified but unwilling to abandon her friends, climbed higher, hoping to reach a ledge where the bear couldn't follow. Her hands were bloodied from gripping jagged rocks, her lungs burning with exertion. The bear, however, seemed to sense her desperation. It turned back toward Ezra, who had tried to drag himself away despite his shattered leg. The bear delivered a final blow, silencing him forever. Hours later, the forest returned to its quiet rhythm, the bear retreating to its den. The trail runners lay scattered along the slope, their bright athletic gear a stark contrast to the muted tones of the wilderness. Blood soaked the ground, mingling with the dirt and snow. It wasn't until the next day that search and rescue teams, alerted by family members when the group failed to return, discovered the aftermath. The scene was gruesome, the bodies bearing the unmistakable marks of a bear attack. The rescuers, experienced in the perils of Wyoming's backcountry, pieced together the story from the tracks and signs left behind. News of the tragedy spread quickly, igniting heated debates about trail safety and human encroachment into bear habitats. Some argued for stricter regulations and better education for outdoor enthusiasts, while others lamented the encroachment of civilization into wild spaces, blaming the runners for venturing too close to the bear's domain. The ultramarathon continued as planned, but the course was altered to avoid the area where the attack had occurred. A memorial was placed along the trail, a somber reminder of the lives lost and the dangers of underestimating nature. In the end, the forest remained unchanged, its ancient rhythms unaffected by the tragedy. The grizzly, the apex predator of this untamed land, roamed its territory unchallenged. And the mountains stood silent, eternal witnesses to the fragile balance between human ambition and the wild's indomitable power.